Today, Little Cooks is exploring a Christmas baking tradition outside New Zealand. We're going to have a look at the German Christmas Stollen. The Stollen is like a festive fruit bread. The recipe is about 600 years old, and at some point it was changed from being just a simple bread to an enriched bread by adding butter, fruit, and nuts. Every German family has their own take on the recipe, and it is usually handed over from generation to generation. If you have made a bread before, you know that you always start with yeast, a liquid, and some form of sugar. For the Stollen, we use milk as a liquid and honey to feed the yeast. We mix milk, honey, and yeast together and wait a few minutes until the mix becomes frothy, indicating that the yeast is active. Then we can start by adding some high-grade flour. Using high-grade flour is important because it has a high gluten content, and the gluten makes our fruit bread nice and elastic. We then mix these ingredients together into a soft dough, which will eventually form a little ball. This is called a starter or a starter dough. We then sprinkle a little bit of flour on top. We cover the bowl and rest it in the fridge for about 2 hours. During this time, we expect the yeast to start working and the starter to expand, and this will be indicated by little cracks in the flour. Once we can see the dough is ready, we can see these cracks in the flour, we know we can proceed with the next step. We're going to add more flour, butter, salt, vanilla paste, lemon zest, and marzipan, which is an almond paste. It is quite popular in Germany for Christmas baking, and it is basically ground almonds combined with icing sugar and egg white, and this creates quite a nutty flavor. We knead all these ingredients together, and kneading the dough well is important to make the gluten molecules bond together and form long gluten strands, and that will make our fruit bread nice and elastic later on. Then we are ready to carefully add raisins, slivered almonds, and mixed peel, which I have soaked in a little bit of rum, but you can also use orange juice instead to make the dried fruit plump up and nice and juicy. After this, the dough is basically ready to be shaped into a loaf on a baking tray. It then needs to rest for another 20 minutes in order to avoid the loaf to crack later in the oven. The final step is flattening about 2/3 of the loaf with a rolling pin and then folding the flat side over to create a traditional loaf shape. After another rest, the Stollen will be baked for about an hour and a half, and then while it is still hot, I brush it with some melted butter and sprinkle it with caster sugar. Once the butter will be cold, it forms like a protective layer around the Stollen, and that will keep it fresh for a longer period of time. This is important because we usually bake the Stollen at the beginning of December and then let the flavors develop until Christmas time. Before we serve it, it will be brushed again with melted butter and then dusted with icing sugar, reminding us of a little bit of snow. Then it is ready and hopefully reminding us of a white Christmas.